Every classroom has stories written on its walls, but few of them ever make history. At Eastbridge High, a quiet suburban school known for its polished reputation and long list of Ivy League acceptances, one story was about to rewrite everything the teachers thought they knew about potential, race, and justice. It began with a woman named Ms. Whitmore. For 22 years, she had ruled the mathematics department like a monarch. Her students went to Stanford, Princeton, Yale, and she loved reminding everyone of that fact. Her classroom gleamed with awards and plaques, sunlight reflecting off the glass frames as if even the sun approved of her excellence. To most, she was the image of professionalism. But beneath the surface, behind the polite smiles and "I expect nothing but the best," hid a quiet arrogance, a belief that talent looked a certain way, spoke a certain way, came from certain homes. And then there was Marcus Reed, a 16-year-old transfer student who carried worn notebooks, a cracked phone, and a quiet determination that no one seemed to notice. He'd arrived from a public school on the other side of the city, one with leaky ceilings, shared textbooks, and teachers who rarely stayed long enough to remember every name. Most kids at Eastbridge didn't know what to make of him. He didn't wear expensive sneakers. He didn't talk much. He didn't sit with anyone during lunch. And when he raised his hand, Ms. Whitmore barely noticed. Marcus's life outside school was nothing like his classmates. Every morning, before the sun had even burned through the fog, he'd catch 2 buses and a train just to reach Eastbridge on time. His backpack was patched from wear.
His shoes had walked miles.
His phone doubled as his calculator, his textbook, and his tutor. While others went home to private tutors and piano lessons, Marcus worked evening shifts at a corner store, stocking shelves and sweeping floors beside a humming soda fridge until midnight. Then in the tiny apartment he shared with his mother, he'd open his second-hand laptop and teach himself calculus through online courses. The numbers didn't scare him. They spoke to him. Equations, formulas, patterns. All of it made sense in a way the world often didn't. And somewhere deep inside, Marcus carried a quiet truth. If he could master what others said was impossible, maybe he could prove he belonged anywhere. But not everyone saw his quiet brilliance, especially not Ms. Whitmore. She noticed other things instead. His silence, his second-hand clothes, the fact that his handwriting was neat but his confidence too small for her liking. To her, he was another scholarship kid who'd crumble under pressure. Over coffee one morning, she even told a colleague, "They mean well, but these transfer students rarely last in my class." Advanced math isn't just about numbers. It's about background, preparation, discipline. You can't fake that. If she'd only known how wrong she was. The truth was, Marcus didn't just keep up, he stayed ahead. By the time Ms. Whitmore was teaching integration by parts, he was already exploring multivariable calculus. When she assigned homework, he solved extra problems for fun. When others memorized steps, he wanted to know why they worked. But Marcus had also learned an important rule about surviving in places like Eastbridge. Sometimes silence is safer than brilliance. He'd seen how teachers looked at him differently when he spoke too confidently, how some classmates laughed when he gave perfect answers, as if success didn't fit his face. So he stopped volunteering. He let them underestimate him. He let them believe he was average, until one Friday morning when Ms. Whitmore decided to make an example out of him. The bell had just rung for her second period calculus class. Students shuffled to their seats, whispering, scrolling through their phones, comparing weekend plans. Marcus sat in his usual spot near the window, quietly unpacking his notebook. Ms. Whitmore closed her gradebook with a crisp snap. That sound meant trouble, the kind of trouble that made even straight-A students sit up straighter. "Class," she announced, her voice sharp but calm. "We've been learning integration techniques for 2 weeks. I think it's time we see who's truly understanding the material." She paused, her eyes sweeping the room before landing on the one student she'd never trusted to belong there. "Marcus," she said, "why don't you come to the board and show us what you've learned?" The room went still. It wasn't a request. Everyone knew that. Heads turned. A few students grinned. One whispered, "She's gonna roast him." Marcus froze for half a second. He could feel the heat of their stares, the pulse of tension building behind his ribs. Then slowly he stood up and walked to the front. Ms. Whitmore took out a manila folder from her desk. Inside, a problem copied from a graduate-level mathematics textbook her friend at the local university had given her. "This one should be interesting," she said, her tone sweet like sugar hiding vinegar. She handed him the sheet. "Take your time. Explain each step as you go. We're all eager to see your process." Marcus read the question once. His eyes widened, not from fear, but recognition. He'd seen this problem before. Not the exact numbers, but the concept. A complex integral from an MIT course he'd been studying late at night. He looked up slowly. Ms. Whitmore was smiling, the kind of smile that expected to watch him crumble. But something shifted in Marcus. He thought of his mother sleeping after her night shift, exhausted but proud. He thought of every night he'd spent at that kitchen table with nothing but an old lamp, a pencil, and hope. He picked up the marker. "This," he said quietly, "is a multivariable integration problem." The class went silent. Even Ms. Whitmore's smile faltered. Marcus began writing, clear, steady lines explaining every step as he went. "We'll start by setting up the bounds of integration," he said. "Then we apply substitution to simplify the function." His voice gained strength. His confidence grew. Each line on the board was precise, every explanation sharp and clean. The room, once filled with whispers, was now filled with awe. Students who'd expected a spectacle found themselves learning. For the first time in years, Ms. Whitmore didn't have control of her own classroom. When Marcus finally wrote the final step and underlined his answer, the clock ticked once. Then silence. He turned, placed the marker down, and said, "The answer is 16 pi over 3. No one moved. No one spoke. Ms. Whitmore stared at the board as if it had betrayed her. Then her face changed. Shock hardened into suspicion. And in that silence, Quan, the kind that makes hearts pound, she said the words that would ignite the storm to come. "Marcus," she began slowly, "where exactly did you learn how to do that?" Marcus felt the weight of the question settle in the air like thick smoke. Every eye in the classroom was fixed on him. Some curious, some doubtful, and others quietly amused. He could feel the judgment pressing against his skin. "I studied ahead," he said, trying to keep his voice even. Ms. Whitmore tilted her head. "Studied ahead?" she repeated, her tone soft but sharp underneath. "Into graduate-level mathematics?" The class shifted. Someone snickered. Another whispered, "No way." Marcus tightened his jaw. "Yes, ma'am. I took online courses, free ones. From MIT. I practice problems like this one." Her smile returned, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "How convenient," she said. "And you just happen to have practiced this exact type of problem?" He nodded, though his stomach churned. "Something very similar." "Remarkable," she said, her voice dripping with disbelief. "You've managed to master techniques even I don't teach here." There was laughter from the back of the room. A few students leaned forward, waiting for the confrontation. Ms. Whitmore turned to the class. "Now, students, it's important to understand that integrity is just as valuable as intelligence. Sometimes what appears impressive at first glance," she let her words linger, "isn't as genuine as it seems." The implication hung heavy. Marcus could feel his chest tightening. "I didn't cheat," he said firmly. Her tone hardened. "Then explain how a student who transferred from a district where calculus isn't even offered somehow solved a problem most college students can't." The room buzzed with tension. Marcus looked around, at faces that had once ignored him now staring as if he'd committed a crime. "Because I work hard," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "Because I studied when everyone else was asleep." For a moment there was silence. Then Tyler Grant, the school's basketball captain and golden boy, leaned back in his chair. "Or maybe you just copied it off someone who actually knows what they're doing," he muttered. Ms. Whitmore didn't stop him. "Marcus," she said, "you'll need to bring your notes and materials to my office after class. Until then, you may take your seat." He didn't move. "Are you saying I cheated?" She looked him dead in the eye. "I'm saying your performance raises questions about academic honesty." The word struck like a slap. The whispering grew louder. Even the sound of the clock ticking felt cruel. When the bell rang, Ms. Whitmore handed him a yellow slip, the kind every student dreaded. "Please report to Principal Lewis's office," she said. "We'll discuss this further there." He took the paper without a word, walked out into the hallway, and kept walking. The echo of his steps followed him like a heartbeat that wouldn't calm down. By the time he reached the principal's door, his hands were trembling. He thought of his mother, of what she'd say if she heard he'd been accused of cheating. He thought of every night spent hunched over that dim kitchen light, solving equations no one had asked him to solve. Inside, Principal Lewis sat behind a wide desk, her glasses perched low on her nose. "Marcus," she said softly, "please, sit." He sat. "I received Ms. Whitmore's report," she continued. "She's concerned about the problem you solved in class today. It seems it required knowledge far beyond your current coursework." He swallowed hard. "I didn't cheat, ma'am. I can prove it." "I believe you want to," she said kindly. "But Ms. Whitmore has a reputation for accuracy. This isn't something I can dismiss without looking into it." He reached into his bag, pulling out his worn notebook, pages filled with equations, scribbles, and calculations that looked like chaos to anyone else but told the story of his persistence. "Everything's here," he said. "I've been studying online for months. I can show you the websites, the lectures. I can even solve more problems right now." Principal Lewis hesitated. She saw the desperation in his eyes, and something about it unsettled her. "Marcus," she said gently, "these courses you're talking about, are they official?" "They're public," he replied. "Free. MIT posts them online. Anyone can learn from them." Before she could respond, there was a knock on the door. Her secretary peeked in, her expression uneasy. "Principal Lewis," she said, "there's someone here to see you. A Dr. Evans from the University Mathematics Department. He says it's urgent." Marcus's head snapped up. The door opened wider, and in stepped a woman with gray-streaked hair, sharp eyes, and a calm authority that filled the room. "Principal Lewis," she said, shaking her hand. "I'm sorry to intrude unannounced, but I was visiting Eastbridge today as part of our education outreach program. I was in the back of Ms. Whitmore's class during the incident with this young man." Marcus blinked. "You were there?" She nodded. "I was, and I believe there's been a serious misunderstanding." Ms. Whitmore entered the office behind her, her expression tight. "Dr. Evans," she said quickly, "I appreciate your presence, but this matter concerns academic integrity. I'm sure you understand our need to maintain standards." Dr. Evans smiled politely but firmly. "And I'm sure you understand mine, to recognize genuine brilliance when I see it." The tension in the room was electric. Principal Lewis folded her hands. "Perhaps we should discuss what you observed, Dr. Evans." "I observed," Dr. Evans began, "a young man who demonstrated deep conceptual understanding, not memorization. The problem Ms. Whitmore presented was taken from a graduate-level text. I've taught that very problem myself. It requires understanding, not chance." He didn't recite steps, he explained them. Ms. Whitmore's lips thinned. With all due respect, it was too perfect, too precise. It felt rehearsed. Or, Dr. Evans countered, it felt like someone who has spent nights studying without anyone believing in him. Marcus felt something shift, like the first breath after being underwater. But Ms. Whitmore wasn't done. "Dr. Evans, surely you must admit it's unusual for a 16-year-old to have such mastery without formal instruction." "Unusual?" Dr. Evans said. "Yes, impossible. No, history is full of autodidacts, self-taught minds who changed the world precisely because they weren't limited by expectations," Principal Lewis interjected. "So what do you suggest we do?" Dr. Evans looked at Marcus. "Let him prove it. Give him a controlled assessment. Problems chosen by me, solved under supervision. No internet, no notes. Just his mind." Ms. Whitmore stiffened. "This is highly irregular." "What's irregular," Dr. Evans said evenly, "is punishing a student for being extraordinary." The room fell silent. Principal Lewis finally spoke. "All right, we'll do it today, 1 hour from now. Marcus, are you willing?" He nodded, his voice quiet but steady. "Yes, ma'am." "Then it's settled," said Dr. Evans. "One test. 3 problems. 1 chance to show the truth." And as Marcus walked out of that office, his heart pounding, one thought echoed in his mind. This wasn't just about clearing his name anymore. It was about proving that brilliance could come from anywhere. He didn't know it yet, but that single hour would change everything. The next hour stretched endlessly, yet every second pulsed with purpose. Marcus sat alone in the quiet study hall, his backpack beside him, his hands clasped tightly. His palms were sweating, but his mind was sharp. He kept replaying Dr. Evans's words. 1 test, 3 problems, 1 truth. He thought about his mother again, about the way she'd always say, "Baby, hard work doesn't whisper. It roars when it's time." This was that moment. He couldn't let fear silence it. At exactly 3 o'clock, he was called into the mathematics conference room. The walls were lined with framed equations and dusty awards, relics from a school proud of its traditions. But none of those trophies had faces like his. None told stories like his. Principal Lewis was already there, sitting beside Ms. Whitmore, who looked stiff and defensive. Dr. Evans stood at the head of the table, 3 sealed envelopes in front of her. "Marcus," Dr. Evans said gently, "each envelope contains one problem from a different area of advanced mathematics. You'll have an hour to solve all 3. Show your work and explain your reasoning out loud. We'll be watching, but no one will interrupt." Marcus nodded. His throat was dry, but his voice was steady. "I understand." Dr. Evans handed him the first envelope. He tore it open carefully, scanning the page. It was a problem on optimization using constraints. Not easy, but familiar enough. He exhaled slowly, picked up his pencil, and began. As the minutes passed, the room seemed to shrink around him, the hum of the lights fading into the rhythm of thought and graphite on paper. He narrated his process in calm, clear tones. "To minimize this function, we introduce a constraint equation," he said. "Using Lagrange multipliers, we set up partial derivatives of each variable and solve for lambda." Ms. Whitmore leaned slightly forward, her pen frozen over her notepad. There was no hesitation in his work. No bluffing, no faking. Just precision born of countless late nights. After 15 minutes, he set down his pencil and looked up. "That's the critical point. It satisfies both conditions." Dr. Evans reviewed the steps quickly, her eyes brightening. "Accurate and efficient," she murmured. "Go on, Marcus." The second envelope contained a linear algebra problem, eigenvalue decomposition of a 3x3 matrix. Even seasoned students struggled with this one. Marcus smiled faintly, recognizing the challenge. He spoke as he wrote, his voice firm now, confidence seeping into every word. "To find the eigenvalues, we take the determinant of the matrix a minus lambda y and set it equal to 0. He didn't just solve it, he explained it like a teacher. He described what each transformation represented, why the steps mattered, how the logic connected. Dr. Evans glanced at Principal Lewis and nodded slightly. Ms. Whitmore's lips were pressed tight, her knuckles white around her pen. 30 minutes had passed. 2 envelopes down. The third sat waiting like the final gatekeeper. Marcus reached for it, heart pounding. Inside was a second-order differential equation with boundary conditions. For a moment, he froze. It was harder than anything he'd ever seen. The kind of question that could crush even the strongest nerves. Ms. Whitmore's eyes caught that brief hesitation, and she sat up straighter. "Take your time," she said softly, her tone laced with false sympathy. But Marcus wasn't stuck. He was thinking, deeply. Then he began to speak. "This is a non-constant coefficient differential equation. To solve it, we'll use the method of Frobenius." The air seemed to change. Dr. Evans's eyebrows rose. Ms. Whitmore blinked in disbelief. Marcus continued, writing smoothly, explaining each transformation as though he'd rehearsed it 1,000 times. But this wasn't memorized. It was understanding. Half an hour later, he placed his pencil down. Every problem complete, every step detailed, every explanation flawless. Silence filled the room like a held breath. Dr. Evans moved forward first, scanning each page with the care of someone handling priceless work. Her eyes flicked over his calculations, her pen tracing the logic line by line. When she finally looked up, her voice was calm but charged with conviction. "These solutions are not only correct, they're extraordinary. His reasoning is sound. His methods are original. There's no question he understands this material deeply." She turned to Ms. Whitmore. "Would you like to review them yourself?" Ms. Whitmore hesitated, then reached for the pages. Her eyes darted across the formulas, her brow furrowing as realization set in. Every line she read dismantled her doubts. Every step dismantled her pride. She put the paper down slowly. I can't find an error." Principal Lewis looked from one to the other. "Then we're agreed? There's no indication of dishonesty?" Dr. Evans nodded firmly. "None whatsoever. What we've witnessed is genuine talent, rare, raw, and remarkable." Marcus sat perfectly still, unsure if he'd truly heard her right. Dr. Evans turned to him. "You've done something extraordinary, Marcus. What you showed today goes beyond what most undergraduates can achieve. You have a mind that sees beauty in logic. Never apologize for that." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Principal Lewis leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. "Ms. Whitmore," she said quietly, "I think you owe this student an apology." The teacher's face paled. Pride warred with shame behind her eyes. She began, then stopped. "I was wrong," she said finally, the words tasting bitter. "Marcus, I misjudged you. I thought I was protecting standards, but I was really protecting my assumptions." Marcus didn't gloat. He just nodded politely, his voice soft but steady. "Thank you." But Dr. Evans wasn't finished. "This isn't just about an apology," she said. "It's about recognition. If Marcus can do this without instruction, imagine what he could do with it. Principal Lewis, I'm prepared to recommend him for early placement in our university's mathematics program." The room went silent again. Principal Lewis blinked. "You mean?" "Yes," said Dr. Evans. "A full scholarship, mentorship, real opportunity." Ms. Whitmore sank back in her chair. Marcus stared at the floor, his breath shaky as if his mind was trying to catch up to reality. In one afternoon he had gone from accused to accepted, from invisible to undeniable, but the story wasn't finished, because the real test was never the math. It was whether anyone else would learn from what they'd just witnessed. The next morning the news swept through Eastbridge like wildfire. By first period every hallway was buzzing with whispers. Students huddled by lockers repeating fragments of the story. How Marcus Reed, the quiet transfer student, had solved impossible equations. How a university professor had defended him. How even Ms. Whitmore had been forced to admit she was wrong. Some told it like a miracle, others like a scandal. But one thing was certain: Eastbridge High would never look the same again. When Marcus walked into school that day, eyes followed him from every corner. Some faces showed awe, some confusion, some guilt. A few whispered congratulations he didn't quite know how to accept. He wasn't used to being seen. Ms. Whitmore stood by her desk when he entered the classroom. For the first time in her long career, she seemed smaller, less certain, less in control. "Marcus," she said quietly, "may I speak with you before we begin?" He nodded. "I want to say again that I'm sorry. I let my assumptions guide me instead of evidence. I see now how wrong that was." He looked at her, searching her expression for sincerity. There was no smugness this time, just remorse. "Thank you, ma'am," he said softly. She hesitated, then added, "You've changed how I see my own classroom, and maybe how I see what brilliance looks like." For the first time, Marcus smiled, not out of pride, but relief. That day's lesson began differently. Ms. Whitmore wrote a simple sentence on the board before saying a single word. "Talent has no uniform." The room was silent. She turned to her students and said, "Remember that." After class, Dr. Evans called. She'd already spoken with Principal Lewis. The scholarship was official. Marcus had earned early admission to the university's advanced mathematics program. When he told his mother that evening, she dropped the dish she'd been washing. "Say that again," she whispered. He repeated it, slower this time. "They offered me a scholarship. Full ride. Dr. Evans is helping with the paperwork." Tears filled her eyes before she could speak. "You see? All those nights, baby. Every one of them meant something." He hugged her tightly, feeling the weight of every sleepless study session finally lift. But the story didn't end there. Dr. Evans wasn't the kind of person to let lessons like this fade quietly. She saw what had almost happened, how close the system had come to crushing a mind simply because it didn't fit its mold. She called a meeting with the district superintendent and presented a proposal: anonymous academic assessments for all advanced placement evaluations. No names, no transcripts, no prejudged expectations. Just ability. At first, the idea was met with polite resistance. Schools liked their traditions. Teachers liked their instincts. But Dr. Evans's voice carried the kind of authority that didn't fade after one conversation. "You nearly lost a mathematician who could change the world," she said. "Because the world keeps expecting genius to look familiar." By the end of the month, the district approved the pilot program. Eastbridge became the first to implement it, and what they discovered shook the school to its foundation. Students who'd been labeled average began solving problems that stunned teachers. Quiet kids no one had noticed revealed abilities that left their classes speechless. A girl named Lila, often dismissed for her shyness, turned out to have near-perfect spatial reasoning skills. A boy named Ravi, who'd been placed in standard algebra because of his language barrier, solved differential equations with natural fluency once the labels were stripped away. In the following months, Eastbridge's academic ranking rose, not because the wealthy students performed better, but because hidden brilliance was finally being seen. Ms. Whitmore attended every new evaluation, volunteering to proctor the tests. She watched in awe as students she'd overlooked excelled before her eyes. She started staying late after school, offering tutoring to anyone who wanted help. Regardless of their background, she no longer asked where they came from, only where they wanted to go. Marcus, meanwhile, began attending weekend classes at the university. Dr. Evans mentored him personally, guiding him through advanced courses, introducing him to mathematicians and researchers. His ideas grew bolder, his curiosity deeper. He wasn't just learning formulas anymore. He was learning how to question them, to see patterns beyond the surface. But even with his new path unfolding, he never forgot what had almost happened. One evening, as he stood in the empty Eastbridge hallway waiting for his mother to pick him up, he looked through the glass of Ms. Whitmore's classroom. She was alone, sitting at her desk, staring at a stack of student papers. He walked in quietly. "Still working late?" She looked up, surprised but smiling faintly. "Old habits. I'm trying to do things differently now. You changed a lot around here, you know." "I didn't mean to," he said. "Good," she replied. "Because the ones who change the world never do it by trying to. They just keep being who they are until the world has to adjust." He thought about that for a long time. That night, as he rode the bus home, city lights flashing past the window, he pulled out his notebook. On the last page, beneath rows of equations, he wrote one sentence in his neat handwriting. "Genius isn't given. It's discovered." He didn't know that the district would soon expand the program statewide, or that Dr. Evans would present their story at a national education conference, or that within a year, thousands of schools across the country would begin questioning how many of their own students had been invisible all along. He only knew that he finally felt seen, and somewhere deep down, he wondered how many other quiet minds were out there, waiting for someone to notice the light inside them. 3 years later, Eastbridge High was almost unrecognizable. The hallways that once echoed with quiet competition now buzzed with something new: curiosity. Students spoke about equations, essays, and ideas with a kind of confidence that hadn't existed before. Walls once lined with trophies now carried portraits of students who had been recognized not for privilege, but for persistence. The anonymous testing system had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Dozens of schools across the state had adopted it, and reports poured in of students who'd once been invisible now thriving. Some were being fast-tracked into university partnerships. Others were receiving scholarships they never thought possible. At the heart of it all was Marcus Reed. He had just completed his 3rd year at the university under Dr. Evans's mentorship. His hair was a little longer now, his voice deeper, his confidence no longer quiet but calm. He had published 2 papers on mathematical symmetry and algorithmic analysis, something unheard of for someone his age. But what defined him most wasn't the research or the recognition. It was what he chose to do with it. Marcus had returned to Eastbridge for a guest lecture. Word spread days in advance. Teachers rearranged schedules, students filled the auditorium, parents and local reporters squeezed into the back rows. Everyone wanted to see the boy who'd turned doubt into a movement. When he walked onto the stage, the applause didn't just sound. It thundered. He waited for the sound to settle, his hands steady on the podium. 3 years ago, he began, I stood in this same building terrified. I wasn't afraid of math. I was afraid of being unseen. Afraid that no matter how hard I worked, no one would ever believe it came from me. The room grew silent. You could almost hear hearts beating. He continued, that fear didn't come from failure. It came from expectation, from the idea that brilliance wears a uniform, that potential comes with pedigree. But what happened here proved something powerful, that excellence doesn't belong to one kind of person. He paused, scanning the faces before him. I was lucky. Lucky that Dr. Evans was in that classroom. Lucky she spoke up when she could have stayed silent. But luck shouldn't decide whether talent gets noticed. Systems should. In the front row, Ms. Whitmore sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't looked away from him once. Marcus's voice softened. I know some of you in this room feel what I once felt. That you don't look like you belong in the top group. that you have to fight to prove you're more than the assumptions around you. But I'm here to tell you that every late night, every small victory, every page of notes that no one sees, it matters, because truth always rises no matter how long it takes. He told them about the nights studying under a dim lamp, about watching online lectures on borrowed Wi-Fi, about falling asleep over equations only to wake and solve them again. He spoke of failure too, the quiet, hidden kind no one talks about. I failed 100 times, he said. But failure is how truth sharpens itself. What matters is that you keep going until the noise turns into clarity. As he spoke, Dr. Evans watched from the back of the room, smiling quietly. She had seen many gifted minds in her career, but none who carried grace like this. When Marcus finished, the auditorium erupted again, not with noise this time, but with emotion. Students stood, some clapping, others wiping tears. Even teachers rose to their feet. Afterward, as the crowd filtered out, Ms. Whitmore approached the stage. "You've become something remarkable," she said softly. He smiled. "I had good teachers," she shook her head. "You had persistence. I only learned because of you." Dr. Evans joined them, placing a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "The university wants you to continue your research into educational bias. They're offering you a research fellowship to lead a project." He blinked. "Me lead?" "Yes," she said, "because no one understands what's at stake better than you." The following year, Marcus's research turned into a national model for unbiased academic evaluation. His work introduced a data-driven system that identified overlooked talent through pattern recognition in learning habits rather than test scores alone. It transformed how schools across the country viewed ability. He began traveling, speaking at conferences, sharing his journey not as a cautionary tale, but as a call to awareness. He often said, "The tragedy isn't when someone fails. The tragedy is when the world refuses to notice someone capable of greatness." Everywhere he went, teachers approached him in tears, confessing how they doubted students unfairly. Parents thanked him for giving their children courage. Students sent him letters filled with gratitude and stories that sounded painfully familiar. Stories of being dismissed, underestimated, ignored. He read everyone. But even as his name spread, Marcus never lost his humility. He still rode buses instead of buying a car, still tutored younger students online, still answered questions from anyone who reached out for help. To him, success wasn't measured by titles. It was measured by how many others he could lift. One rainy evening, as he walked through Eastbridge's quiet corridors after giving another talk, he passed a student sitting alone, staring at an open textbook. The boy looked up nervously when Marcus approached. "It's too hard," he muttered. "I don't think I'm cut out for this." Marcus smiled gently. "Neither did I," he said. "But hard doesn't mean impossible. It means worth it." He sat beside him, explaining the problem step by step until the boy's eyes lit up with understanding. That moment, more than any award or headline, reminded Marcus why he'd started in the first place. Outside, the rain slowed, the air clear and fresh. Marcus walked home with his hood up, his hands in his pockets, feeling a quiet sense of peace. He had proven what needed proving. But he wasn't done yet.